Hello, and welcome to the show, Living with Climate Change. Today's episode is called Lessons from the Montreal Protocol. And there are many lessons to be learned from that international treaty, but I think that it relates directly to our situation with climate change and trying to pass a global treaty and having difficult with that. And it's very inspiring and enthusiastic, and I think that a lot of people don't know about it. They don't think about it, and I think it should be brought up as much as possible because it was so successful. And the other importance of it is that with this action, we have a real world example of looking at how human activity affected our atmosphere. And we had scientific knowledge of this, and we were warned by scientists. And we took action with the precautionary principle, which we'll talk about. And it was correct. And the threat was, for the most part, stopped. So let's just do a quick review of the Montreal Protocol. I find it very interesting and really relates to climate change a lot. In 1973, scientists discovered CFCs that are, it's a non-toxic, non-flammable chemical. And it was used in refrigerants and air conditioners and hairspray and spray paint and all these things, a man-made substance. But the emissions from CFCs, the gaseous CFC emissions, when they are released into the atmosphere, they deplete the ozone layer that is in the stratosphere. And as you probably know, the ozone layer protects us from harmful UV radiation, in A, B, and C UV radiation that is in high dosages can be very harmful for plants, animals, people, skin cancer, can cause blindness. And so that really protects our life on Earth. So that's another part of our atmosphere that is very delicate and important. And just basically the science of it, the reason is because CFCs, they have highly reactive atoms of chlorine and bromine. And these, if you remember from your periodic table of elements, these are very highly reactive gases. And they break down ozone, O3, ozone molecules. And they last a long time, and they're so very, very dangerous on depleting the ozone layer. And it actually created an ozone hole. In '85, they discovered that, and then the Montreal Protocol was an international environmental treaty to phase out CFCs. And so it was a very quick response. They discovered this in 1973, and by 1987, they had an international agreement to phase these out. Now, let's look at So the Montreal Protocol, it's been ratified by all members of the United Nations, 197 members. So it's a landmark. It's maybe considered the most successful international treaty ever, not even an environmental treaty. And as we have seen now that the ozone depletion slowed down dramatically, it still is maybe becoming a problem. That's another topic. But this was a very successful agreement. And you wonder why they were agreed on that, and we cannot agree on carbon dioxide. So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. And I must say that time, that late 80s, there was this report called the Brundtland Report, I think it's named, and it was it's known as Our Common Future, and it's a great report that was put together by the UN and in '87, and we still have that the definition of sustainable development comes from that, and it's a magnificent study and report. And it's such a shame that we did not follow that globally. Anyway, that's a thing to look into. So that is what they did. And another thing I want to talk about, I've mentioned, is this idea of the precautionary principle that I've mentioned, that is what they used in the Montreal Protocol and the Kyoto Protocol, I believe, but we don't hear that much about it anymore. So it's kind of intuitive that you probably know what it means, but it's about taking action on something that is high risk in the future. And so it's taking precaution, doing on something that could be irreversible or very devastating, and it's taking action even though there is uncertainty. So, for instance, that you have models predicting things, and so the precautionary principle can be a weak precaution to a strong precaution, and this is in legislation and law and things like that. It's a common term, but they use that, and it's clearly what this relates to climate change now, because we have models, and they're not always right, but so this is what they used in the Montreal Protocol, and like I said, this is a very successful agreement, and that led to action, and it phased out CFCs. And now we have these HCFCs that I think that they may try to phase those out. But this was a very serious thing. But I remember when I was a young boy and hearing about this and just shaking my head like how could they know this? From spray paint and things like that are going to destroy the atmosphere. I thought that was a weird thing. But so the lessons of this are that we can come together and agree on things that are scientific, that deal with our environment, that are unsure of and have uncertainty, And now let's discuss why the Montreal Protocol was passed and action was taken in a very short period, 1973 to 1987, already in action and on the move, and why carbon dioxide, that we cannot agree on climate change treaty. And I find this is kind of leads to an interesting discussion. So let's look at that now. Well, I think that we probably all know, but let's look back. Now the CFCs, it was kind of scary. It seemed as an imminent threat, and because, you know, people thought that the sun was just going to burn them up and cause them to go blind and give them cancer, skin cancer, and obviously that is, if you tell the public that, they will get pretty scared. I think I would say that that's more scary than telling them that that the temperatures are going to get warmer. But obviously the scientists are telling them much, much more. And you can argue that they are telling them about the same stuff. That it is as an imminent threat as CFCs was. But also, so let's look at this, and you always follow the money. My understanding of the Montreal Protocol, and it may be a cynical view of this, but we went into this a lot in one of a climate law class I had, that it was really the economics of it. That Dow Chemical Company, I believe they thought they could do this easily and make more money. But it was quite a shift in industry, I would imagine. But I'm not saying that's what it was, but it might have been. That was a successful environmental treaty. Now, as you can imagine, why would the President of the United States not agree to this? Which is quite odd, but why would it not easily be adopted with binding convictions, instead of voluntarily, and be phased? Why wouldn't CO2 be phased out? Well, it's clear, it's because this carbon lock-in, and it's all our energy is all tied to fossil fuel that emit CO2, and that's the problem. So anyway, this is just the rest of it you can think about and comment, raise questions, but we have this incredible, successful example that is a real world example. And I think I don't hear this being used as an argument to move forward as fast as you can on climate change. So I hope that I can bring this up, that it will come back into the conversations of climate change policy. Because this, now, in my opinion, the science behind the Montreal Protocol is almost more complicated, maybe, than the greenhouse effect, which is the basis of the science behind climate change. And yet they acknowledged it, and they took the precautionary principle, and they didn't question the science. Now, if the science behind global warming and the greenhouse effect was as not just a little more harder to believe for the average person that's not a scientist, then I imagine climate change wouldn't be talked about very much. But this raises questions. So now back to the precautionary principle. The only reason you would not follow that is that if your actions that you took now were more devastating than the future, the uncertainty that in the future that might happen, meaning if you, let's for instance say that if you just stopped all electricity and all fuel consumption immediately in the United States, that it would cause such havoc that it would be worse than the projections of climate change. I mean, that's an argument, but we're not in that position, really. I mean, it is not going to be devastating to hardly anyone to reduce energy use. We're so advanced and we have such a comfortable life that the sacrifices on the developed countries and most of the world is not going to be devastating on people's livelihoods. I don't see how. Now, if you're in Africa and you're in or India and you're in villages and provinces that have no electricity and are suffering poverty and high birth rate, and it's just bad all around. Now they need basic electricity for lights to read at night and things like that, for education. That I understand. But the rest of the world, we can, I just don't think that the problem has been presented well enough to the public. And that's maybe why you have such constant bleak predictions that are being published, and then at the same time you have the mainstream that don't want to talk about climate change. So this is a very hard problem. And of course, I've mentioned not getting panicky and freaking out over what may come, because I don't think it's going to help anybody. Because we have to live with this. And so the whole thing is quite complicated and dynamic. But I just wanted to bring this up because I think it's just a very an important example. It's a promising example of global cooperation and success in these things. And I think we should use it as a model, and I think they are. And many people know this, but again, many people don't. So that's, I think that'll be it for this show, and I hope I've raised some questions and some understanding of our past international treaties and what we can do and the success we can have. And the Montreal Protocol was a great one, and we have many lessons to learn from that we can use going forward in climate change negotiations, that I hope politicians they maybe bring this up. And on another note, a final note, this will be the last show at this location that I'm at, and it's going to kind of wrap up the first season of the show. And I will start posting the shows now, and I haven't really done that. I'm like creating this show this season, a pilot series, kind of the way I think about it, you know, old TV. And I will start posting it, and I will see if anybody cares about it and they like it and they watch it, and we will see. And if they do, I will continue it. And if you like the show and it's worth anything to you, you know how you can support the development of this show. So I think that we will wrap it up today. And I will see you again at a different location. And I look forward to it. And I've enjoyed this whole experience of me creating this little show. And in a way, it's, you know, I'm working it out together. And because it's tough. This is a very hard thing to deal with on so many levels. And I hope that you know, when you do things together, it's easier. So I thank you for joining me if you have, and look forward to kind of season 2 of living with climate change. Thank you for joining me. We'll see you next season. Bye-bye.